Good governance is critical to any data initiative. The tricky part is to get the right balance. If you have no governance, you have anarchy, and the result is not going to be good. On the other side, if you have too much governance, then things are going to be slow and bureaucratic, and nothing's going to get done. You're going to have mutiny. These are both bad scenarios. I like to talk about the concept of minimum viable governance. What is the least governance that you can have and still be successful? There's this imaginary dotted line that exists, and if you cross over that dotted line, you're in anarchy zone, and probably the results are not going to be good. But if you get too far away, then you get stagnant. You aren't going to be successful in delivering quickly. So I have a proposed set of 6 principles of minimum viable governance. And every organization, you can choose which ones to use, which ones not to use, which ones to add to the list. You have to make it yours. But this is a good starting point, I find, with organizations. I'm going to start with a really stupid and boring one: naming standards. How boring is that? It may be boring, but actually we need consistency in naming. Otherwise, you have Tower of Babel. We aren't able to communicate across multiple data products or within a data model effectively if we don't have naming standards. Now, the problem with naming standards is teams will argue for hours about naming standards. Should we use underscores or capital letters and small letters? Should we get rid of double consonants? How do we treat vowels? There are all kinds of things that you can argue about. And actually, I don't care. I only care that you're consistent. Choose a naming standard and gift it to all the teams. This does not mean that you have a centralized naming committee, and every time you name a table or name a column, you have to come to the committee and get approval and so on. That is a disaster. That destroys agility. You want to empower the teams who are experts in their business process domain to make the naming standard decisions, but you give them a framework for how those names should be constructed. One naming standard for the enterprise, that's part of minimum viable governance in my mind. Related to naming standards is data typing. Consistency in data typing is important. If we have primary and foreign keys in this data product that are integers and this one that are characters, then you've got an impedance mismatch. That's no good. Or take something as basic as a flag. We've all got them, true, false flags. Are we going to code it as Y and N, yes and no? Or maybe in Spanish it would be S and N, C and no. Or maybe it's 0, 1, 1, 2. Maybe it's a Boolean value, true and false. Or maybe T and F. There are many ways to encode, and again, I don't care which one you use, but pick one and be consistent for the data types and how the domain values are populated within those data types. Key construction, in my opinion, is the most important of the minimum viable governance principles. Keys tell you how to relate between different data products, primary and foreign keys, so that I can understand that this customer who has a mortgage is also the same customer who has a credit card or a direct deposit account. We want to make sure that primary and foreign keys are consistent across data products. That means we cannot have each business process domain team inventing their own algorithms for key construction. Because if we do that, even if they use the same data type, if they don't match, we're not going to be able to have interoperability, which is a big problem. What we want is an enterprise key service. So most of the ab initio customers, we use an enterprise key service that is across all the different business process domains. And then it's consistent, because when I construct a customer ID and you construct a customer ID, it's the same customer ID for the same person. Or the account number in a transaction and the account number in the account, it's constructed in the same way. So we have this referential integrity, which is critical. Now, one thing I would warn you against is using natural keys, specifically when natural keys contain personally identifiable information. using social security number to represent a customer ID is a very bad idea. First of all, it's a bad idea because social security numbers get reused over time. So it's actually not a solid key from a data integrity point of view, but also it violates regulatory rules about exposing personally identifiable information. GDPR and CCPA and POPI and all the reasonable regulations will prevent you from using this kind of natural key without having large fines associated with it. So don't do that. Now, when you deploy this enterprise key service, it's important that it's very scalable, that's used through an API framework that's very easy to use, that the keys can be generated both in batch mode and in real-time mode. There's some constraints around performance and efficiency that you need to take care of, and that's something that the enterprise key service should have built in. So again, this is the most important of the minimum viable governance principles. Now, one that's a little bit more controversial is quality metrics. We want each business process domain team that owns their data product to own the data quality. They own the stewardship, they own the measurement of the data, but having some common quality metrics that all the teams use is very helpful because it helps build a common language for data quality. It helps build trust across different data product domains in order to have that interoperability work a little bit better. We don't want to reinvent best practices for defining metrics for each different team, so you can give that to them, and then they can extend those metrics, and they have full responsibility for the data quality remediation and the calculation of the metrics, the stewardship, and so on. But a framework gifted to each team is, I think, a good practice. Access control, this one is not very controversial, especially in regulated industries dealing with sensitive data. If each team builds their own access control mechanism, this is a lot of work, leads to inconsistencies and difficulties in sharing data across multiple data products, but it's also less secure. It's well documented in the industry that the best way to protect your data is to have a robust role-based access control mechanism that is designed and deployed centrally and then available for everybody to use. Now, it's important that we separate mechanism and policy. So the mechanism is an enterprise mechanism provided by your Chief Information Security Office and is used across the organization. Now, the policy of who gets access to what data for what purpose, that can be owned by each business process domain team because they own their data, they know who can be used it for what purposes, and a good access control mechanism will separate the mechanism from the policy. So the business process domain teams own the policy, but the centralized service owns the access control mechanism. The last one, which is perhaps controversial among some, is technology choices. Now, the extreme in decentralization and I'll say light governance is every team picks their own technology. And if every team picks their own technology, you will have 27 BI tools, 23 ETL tools, 17 databases, and it's going to be a mess. And it's not just a mess from a cost point of view, and there is cost for all those software licenses and maintaining these and so on, but it also means that your skill sets aren't fungible across different areas, and it becomes much harder to share resources and work together when you have inconsistencies in the technologies and tools. That does not mean that one technology solves all the problems. Certainly it does not. You'll need probably multiple databases and maybe multiple BI tools and so on, but unfettered proliferation of tools is not good. It's important to have a strategy for how technology gets deployed. Not too much governance and not too little governance. Again, this anarchy versus mutiny discussion. Now, it's important that you have a lifecycle management strategy. When you bring a technology in, it doesn't mean it should live forever in the organization. You have to have a sunsetting technology. As technology gets long in the tooth, you want to retire it because the cost of having that long in the tooth technology is going to be more than the value it's delivering it, because there are newer, better technologies which are being introduced into the marketplace all the time. If you have too much churn, that's no good, because the cost of the organization of obtaining the new software and the skill sets is too high. But as technology gets long in the tooth, you certainly need a strategy for retiring it. Just like you need a strategy for retiring old technologies, you need a strategy for introducing new technologies. So you need to have some kind of a data lab or some experimental place where you work with new technology, you understand their value, and you decide at what point is this technology worth moving from the experimental mode into mainstream. Mainstream is where the technology that you're supporting for the production, automation of the workloads in the organization are taking place. The tools that your end users are using on a day-to-day basis at scale. This is where most of your investment goes, because this is what you're using to deliver value to the organization. And procurement needs to be involved in making sure you get good prices, that the technology that you use in experimental mode properly scales up, that you have all of the safeguards in place from a security point of view, et cetera, et cetera. Good governance for that mainstream technology is critically important. So these are the 6 areas where I would recommend that you focus on minimum viable governance. This is a starting point. I would suggest that you use this to start thinking about a framework for minimum viable governance and use this to empower your team. So governance should be a good thing. It's an accelerator. It helps you become more agile. It's not a bad bureaucratic thing, because then people will just ignore it. So I hope this is useful for you. Thank you very much.